Hello, today I want to address some of the reasons why people have such a hard time grasping and understanding and internalizing the reality of what's going on in the global banking and financial system today. Now, there's a whole plethora of reasons why this is. Some just has to do with direct disinformation programs that are executed by banker-run governments where they tell you false statistics to tell you the economy's recovering, the economy's okay. But a lot also has to do with psychology. So people just don't like change. They don't like their beliefs challenged. So anytime that they have this belief that they have held firmly, and it's a closely held belief for 20 years, they don't want to consider the possibility that they can be wrong. So sometimes it's just a pure ego thing. It challenges people's egos, and people in general don't like to think that they have believed in something that's been false for so long. So they take the easy way out, which is basically to go back to the equilibrium of believing everything that they have believed in the past to be true while shutting out any new outside information. Other times, like I've seen some gold advocates say, oh, it's ridiculous to think there's gold manipulation. And I think that has to do with a lack of moral integrity and courage, because they have many mainstream clients that they know would be offended by their sensibilities, because these are some of the people that are so old school. Like I told you, they're not unwilling to change. You can't teach a old dog new tricks. So they don't want to lose those clients, so they continue to say, oh, look, gold is great, but there's no manipulation, so don't listen to all this conspiracy talk, because they know if they engage in that, then they'll lose clients. And that's definitely a reason why some of these people continue to deny gold manipulation exists. Because I've seen some people in the mainstream, I can't remember, there's a prominent hedge fund manager, I can't remember his name, who came out and said, look, what the U.S. Federal Reserve did was brilliant. It was evil, but it was brilliant in 2008 to slam gold prices. But since then, he's retracted his statements and taken it back, because I am presuming that he found out that that lost him some clients. So then he hasn't talked about gold manipulation since, even though he knows it exists and is true. So the one method that a lot of people are able to pull the wool over other people's eyes and get them to believe there's no manipulation is just by throwing up ad hominem attacks, meaning they don't address the facts whatsoever, but they just will say, oh, that's ridiculous, that is a conspiracy, why would you ever think that, you're so foolish to think that. And they convince a lot of people of disinformation and lies just by marginalizing reality by saying that's ridiculous. But here's the litmus test to understand where that person is coming from. All you have to do when someone says, oh, that's ridiculous, is then present them with facts and ask them to refute the facts. The problem is there's no journalist today that when people say that in regard to gold manipulation will actually perform that litmus test, present that person with facts and ask them to refute certain facts to support their case that there is no gold manipulation. So let's look at some facts. So on July 14th, the bankers rated gold again in the paper derivatives market and forced gold down more than $40 from $13.40 and troy ounce to under $1,300. So how they accomplished that was from 1:15 to 1:25 a.m. they sold more than 13,490 futures contracts representing 1.349 million ounces, troy ounces of gold, which comes out to about 41.96 tons. Then between 7:15, 7:20 a.m. New York Standard Time, they sold another additional 7,848 futures contracts representing 24.41 tons. And then between 7:55 and 8 a.m. they sold another 15,881 futures contracts representing another 49.40 tons. So in roughly over 30 minutes, they sold over 116 tons of gold. Now, mind you, this is all paper gold, because the futures contracts are only backed by a fractional amount of real physical gold, and plus the overwhelming majority settles in fiat currencies, not in physical gold. So just looking at these facts, now that wasn't the turnover. I'm just talking about 3 spikes I saw within about 35 minutes, and that was the amount of gold, like millions and millions of ounces of gold. Like I said, over 116 tons of gold. But the turnover was, the volume that day was over 208,856 futures contracts, which represents about 650 tons of gold, which is about a quarter of all the gold mined out of the earth in total global gold mining production in 2013. So in one day, they're trading over a quarter, and in just 35 minutes, they're trading over 4% of the total annual gold mine production. Now, mind you, this is not real gold. This is just paper derivatives contracts that are backed almost by zero gold. So when you look at the facts, how is that not manipulation? How is selling imaginary gold that does not exist to knock the price of gold down on no significant news that's going on that should forecast a $40 troy ounce drop in gold? When that happens, why doesn't someone, a journalist, present those facts to someone and say, look, all they're doing is selling off imaginary paper gold to force the price of gold down? It has nothing to do with actual supply and demand determinants of physical gold. So how can you say that is not manipulation? But no journalist will do that. Now on the flip side too, silver also declined quite a bit on Monday, July 14th. I don't know why no one talks about silver, because silver is even more undervalued than gold. But the same thing happened in the silver futures market. On the exact same times too that I mentioned with the gold, they also sold off silver contracts on the exact same time periods, that exact same 35-minute period of those 3 distinct times. Now you tell me that's just a coincidence, or was there something pre-planned, like a banker raid on gold and silver? So they actually sold off about 1,364 tons of silver as well. And again, this is a fake, imaginary paper silver represented by fake paper derivative silver futures contracts to knock down the price of silver. Now, just to show you that these bankers are just as opportunistic. When something negative happens, they're in the midst of their gold and silver raid. But what happens on the wee early mornings of July 18th? Malaysian airline MH17 was shot down over Ukraine so it was reported, Malaysian Airlines reported this at 12:15 a.m. Sydney time, which corresponds to 10:15 a.m. New York time. And you want to know what happened at precisely 10:15 a.m. New York time? Gold and silver futures contracts spiked. A tremendous amount of paper gold and paper silver were bought the minute that was announced that MH17 had crashed, because they knew gold and silver were going to go up. So they forced it up artificially again by buying tons of gold, literally metric tons of gold and silver. But remember, only paper gold and paper silver to drive the price up. And I will actually present this data on my blog later, so don't forget, you can see the link, www.smartknowledgeu.com/blog next week sometime, or perhaps this week sometime. So don't forget to bookmark that, come back, and I'll show you the data. In fact, this is the same data I've been looking at for almost a decade now, and I've been saying this is why gold and silver prices are manipulated. The data is there to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. If you're a logical person and you're open, that's the most important thing, is you're open to considering data that conflicts with your internal beliefs about how financial markets work. Because if I wasn't open to that, I'd be one of those people saying, oh, that's ridiculous to say bankers raid gold and silver to suppress the price down, or that they would be as opportunistic to force the price up when something negative happens to benefit from rising gold and silver prices as well. But as I said, I will put the charts that prove this beyond a shadow of reasonable doubt. Oh, by the way, for those of you that want to check this data before I post it on my blog, the gold futures contracts you want to look at are GCQ14, which is the gold futures for August 2014. For silver, SIU14, which is the silver futures contracts for September 2014. Okay, moving on. I want to speak a little bit about, and I'll speak more a little bit later in this video, about the collapse of Banco Espirito Santo. And if you're Portuguese, forgive me if I'm mangling the name of that. I'm just pronouncing it as if it were Spanish, because that's the language I know how to speak. Speaking of, this is totally off the topic, but it annoys me whenever people talk about the Petro Yuan. They always say yuan or yuan. Just because it's spelled Y-U-A-N does not mean it has an Anglo-Saxon pronunciation. So it's not yuan or yuan, it's yuan. Yuan. Is it really that hard to pronounce? Just like the social media W-E-I-B-O that's used in China. It's not Weibo, it's Weibo. So just hoping that whoever also is among the gold silver advocates will correct people when they keep saying yuan or yuan. It's yuan, yuan, yuan. Okay, okay. That rant aside, let me move on to Banco Espirito Santo. Now, it was almost a little over a year ago, March 2013, when the when there are two big banks in Cyprus that collapsed, and eventually those with over 100,000 euros had over, I believe it was around 50% of their deposits that were taken from them. So in that situation, people went to, I think that happened on a Monday morning, but I'm not sure off the top of my head because I'm just saying this from memory. But in any event, people went to bed one evening and everything was okay in the financial world in Cyprus, and the next morning they woke up and it was chaos. And people said, oh, that can never happen. I even made a video, I'll put the link below, saying what people can do to avoid being Cyprus in the future. Now I'm sure that a lot of people watched that, thought about it, but actually never took action. Here we are more than a year later. And hopefully no one in Portugal viewed my video and said, oh, that won't happen here. Because that is the default psychological response. Oh, that can only happen in Cyprus, but will never happen in my country. That's what people thought in Portugal. And then that just happened this month with Banco Espirito Santo. So people have to be aware that banking system is not sound, it's not safe. If you have your money in a global banking institution, you better get it out while you still have the chance. And you better not say, this can't happen to me. Rather, do your research and understand if these banks are actually well capitalized enough, which I've done my research with almost all the major banks, global banks, have concluded that none of them are well enough capitalized not to present a massive risk to your deposits, which, by the way, is the bank's asset, your liability, which a lot of people also don't realize that in all the legal contracts for your money market accounts that you're actually lending your money, your hard-earned money, to the bank, or your currency, because I don't even like to call fiat currencies money, because I don't consider it money because it doesn't have the quality that all money should have, which is retention of purchasing power over long periods of time, like over a century or longer, which no fiat currency has. So most people don't even realize that you're just lending your money to the bank, and they can do whatever they want with it in as risky a fashion as possible. If there's a bank run, well, you just might be SOL and not get any of your currency back. So do be aware. Don't be one of those people that ends up saying, oh, I heard this, or I listened to this video, I heard someone else say that, I shouldn't trust the global banking system, but I made no move, and then today I wake up and there's a bank run on my bank and I can't get my money out. I also want to discuss one of the other reasons why I think there's such little understanding of why the inequality in wealth distribution patterns are growing in developed countries. Part of it has to do with what I call the language of lies. And I'm actually going to be making another video regarding the language of lies, so keep your eye out by subscribing down below to my channel so you can keep aware when I release that video. But the language of lies is pretty simple. It basically just means that a lot of terms have been flipped upside down. So, for example, there are terms that are used absolutely incorrectly. So when you hear free markets being spoken about by talking heads on TV or in the major newspapers all around the world. There are no free markets, because as long as there are central banks setting interest rates, that means a free market is not setting an interest rate. So they're just absolute, our language has devolved into a series of using terms that are absolute lies, which are accepted by the media as truth. So, we talk about democracies. We don't have there are no democracies in the developed world anymore. Because when you look at, the definition, people don't even stop to think, what is the definition of a democracy? It's the majority rules, right? Well, you look at the interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan that were spearheaded by the United States. The majority of the people, all the polls show the majority of the people did not want those wars. But you have an oligarchy that basically runs a plutocracy in the United States that decides, if we want to do this, it doesn't matter what the majority of people in our country think. We're going to do what we want to do. But yet, those terms are still bandied about all the time like they actually exist. There are no true democracies in this world. There are no true free markets in this world. So we have a language of lies that is propagated by the bread and circuses we have today. So, I've made videos in the past where I've spoken about professional sports being the modern day equivalent of the ancient Roman gladiator games, which Roman empires, when economic situations were terrible as they are today, would always throw and put on gladiator games to distract the masses, to keep their minds off of the terrible economics of their lives by putting on these violent gladiator games. So if we look at just what happened to the World Cup, I would presume, maybe, I know probably within my own friends, at least a minimum of 50% of my friends watch some portion of the World Cup. And probably even higher than that when I think about it. Just thinking about, the friends I know at the top of my head, probably 75% of them watch at least one portion of one game somewhere. FIFA said in 2010, 12% of the world's population watched the World Cup, which is about 1 in 8. So if 1 in 8 watch the World Cup again this year, you have an event going on in Brazil that was much more important to people's lives and their ability to survive going forward, which was a formation of the new BRICS banks, which, BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, right? And also there are other fringe countries that aren't even mentioned, because Germany, I think, will certainly come along. I've been saying this ever since the U.S. Federal Reserve only gave back 5 tons of Germany's 300 tons of gold, which when that happened, I said, look, Germany's gold is gone. They're never going to get it back, okay? So I believe Germany will side on, even though people typically think of Germany as a U.S. ally, they will do what's right for their people and side on the side of the BRICS nations, which is against U.S. dollar hegemony, especially since they know by now they're not getting any of their gold back. And so, in addition to the 5 tons that they received. So, you look at other countries like Japan, people always think of Japan as a U.S. ally. Japan, if they are going to do what's best for the citizens, will also side with the BRICS nations. Now, the BRICS formed a new BRICS bank that will eventually have a minimum of $100 billion of reserve currency. And I guarantee you gold will be part of that reserve currency. If you can see that the development of the BRICS bank is a million times more important and will impact people's lives in an exponential manner than compared to Germany winning the World Cup, which won't impact their lives in any way whatsoever. It's quite astonishing when you think about that. Almost everyone in the world knows about the World Cup, but a very, very small percent of people, I would estimate if you ask 100 people, you'd be lucky to get one person that knows that the BRICS Bank just was announced this past month, and that they have initial funding. They all contributed. The 5 founding countries contributed $10 billion, so they have initial funding of $50 billion in capital. But why this is even more important is it will give them a means to forego the SWIFT system. It's basically the network whereby people can conduct secure financial transactions worldwide. Anytime you wire money, you're using SWIFT, and that has always been the accepted means of executing secure financial transactions internationally. But the BRICS Bank are going to develop their own wiring system, so thereby the U.S. Federal Reserve can't impose sanctions anymore if there are means like they imposed upon Iran, like they imposed upon Russia, like they imposed or threatened Argentina with if they don't pay back their debt to the IMF. So if there is a means of getting around that, then it gives other countries a lot more freedom not to have to bow down to the U.S. Federal Reserve, to the Bank of England, to the International Monetary Fund, to the World Bank, and all these international banks that were set up to enforce U.S. dollar hegemony upon the world. So we see all kinds of examples where these Western banks are enforcing their will and their laws upon sovereign nations. For example, again, in the U.S. Federal Reserve, these banks are behind all these fines, even though they always report, okay, the U.S. government fined BNP Paribas $9 billion for conducting business with unauthorized countries, right? So, but yet, when U.S. companies do it, like Halliburton, you know, Halliburton basically war profiteered to the tune of billions of dollars in Iraq, but no sanctions against Halliburton. It's okay for you to operate in Iraq, but if a foreign bank, like a French bank, is doing it, we're going to fine you $9 billion. And there's nothing that the French bank can do because they'll be threatened with being kicked out of this international system. But like I said, that's why the BRICS Bank is such an important development. It will give these countries a way to stand up to these criminal banking cartels like the U.S. Federal Reserve, the Bank for International Settlements, the IMF, the World Bank, and not have these basically crippling sanctions be put upon them where they can't deal financially and monetarily and transact business anymore. So they'll be able to do this with a new system that basically circumvents the current system right now. So again, now Commerzbank in Germany is being threatened by the U.S. government and for being fined. But look what happens when it's a U.S. bank, like a Wachovia Bank laundered $378 billion for Mexican drug cartels. What was their fine? $116 million. Peanuts, nothing compared to all the money they made from laundering $378 billion of drug money. But yet, BNP Paribas, we're going to fine you $9 billion and you better pay up. Otherwise, we're going to ostracize you from the entire international banking system. Don't get distracted by all these bread and circus games that governments are playing. I mean, the White House even actually issued an official statement about LeBron James returning to Cleveland. That is like so ludicrous that when all these other things are going on that they don't want the public to know about, like Putin regularly speaking to the president of China because they are building international banking systems to circumvent the system. They don't want you to know about that, so they're not going to talk about that. They're going to try to distract you by talking about LeBron James returning to Cleveland and issuing an official statement. Can you imagine President Kennedy having his administration issuing an official statement? No, he never would have, because President Kennedy probably wouldn't even known that LeBron James returned to Cleveland because he was too busy working on important things like trying to help out American citizens, which these governments don't do anymore. And here's the unfortunate thing. We're either going to have some kind of huge black swan event before people actually come to terms with what reality is. So in other words, you're going to have another U.S. stock market crash or massive rapid inflation with massive rapid devaluation of the U.S. dollar, something that cannot be denied before people finally wake up. And that's just a situation. That because the propaganda has been so good. Let me ask you this. How many people are aware of the woes of Banco Espírito Santo in Portugal, right? And what happened was basically that they were holding bonds on their books at 100% of par, where the market price was 70% of par. Now, as soon as the troubles of Banco Espiritu Santo came out, Fortune released a total rebuttal saying, oh, this is only just one bank in Portugal. It's not going to be any contagion or spread to the EU. Certainly has no effect on America or American banks, but yet every big American bank is doing the exact same thing that Banco Espiritu Santo did in Portugal, as they are valuing assets at like 98% of their value, when the market value, they ever marked some markets that market to some fantasy internal valuation model, that a lot of their prices and assets would collapse. So it is a problem. It's just that it hasn't come out in America with American banks yet, but the problem is lurking there for any kind of forensic accountant that looks at their books. They can see all the lies that big American global banks are telling as well. So these are the kinds of bread and circus games that are going on right now with governments all around the world, holding these poker faces like they have a much better hand than they actually are holding. And when something happens, like with Banco Espiritu Santo, they always say, oh, that's just them over there. It has nothing to do with our situation. Not true.